once again, you have all these movies where people are trying to be a we. And so that is still the question. This question of we kind of changes all the time. So there is like, will we remain a we has been one year. Is there a place for us is last year. There is, will we be a we? This year is sort of like, can we even do it? Like, is it even possible for us as a country to come together and be a we? And so that is the question for this year as far as what we're looking at. The first actual theme that I want to kind of look at, which might make us feel like we're not going to be able to be a we, is the first theme is what we call intertribal family fighting. So that doesn't speak well at all, right? So 9 of the movies actually have families fighting or tribal, kind of intertribal fighting. Now this is really important because last year it was very external fighting. Like, you know, in Dune, it's like 2 warring armies. It's like 2 gangs fighting each other. This year it's like the Fabelmans and they're fighting amongst each other in their family. Or, you know, 2 guys on an island with banshees, you know, and even Avatar where you have, you know, some sort of tribal fighting. Really it's about the family and what happens in the family. So that is, you know, what's going on. Let me show you what it looks like in the movies, although we have to disclaim it first.
I want you to explain a word.
We got to explain a word. You want to go ahead and explain it?
We're using a clip to establish this from The Banshees of Inisherin, which is an Irish movie. And so throughout the movie, she often says, his sister in the movie often says, "Are you rowing?" Which means, are you arguing? Are you fighting?
Are you fighting? Yeah, so when you hear in the clip them saying rowing, it means fighting. So here we go. Here's what it looks like.
Have you been rowing?
We haven't been rowing.
I want to stay and fight.
I want to stay and fight too. No one's surprised that you do. All you do is fight.
You are fired. You are fired. You're fired!
Have we been rowing?
My scar! Understand my point.
I'm your mother!
I wish you weren't.
I saved your life!
I saved your life.
Sounds like you've been rowing. It does sound like we've been rowing.
Yeah, rowing.
It does look like we're rowing.
I think they're rowing.
I think they're rowing.
They're rowing. I can't get the Irish accent, but so that's kind of a picture. If as you can see, it's a whole lot of fighting amongst each other, which doesn't really bode well as far as, you know, like if we're looking at a thematic. Right now it's saying, can we be a we? And then it's like, well, here's all this people fighting, which kind of is very reflective of, you know, what we've been through.
And you've put dots on 9 of the movies. I would argue it's 10, because even in All Quiet on the Western Front, it's a war between Europe, which
That's
is sort
true.
of
Look
kin.
at my son movie whispering here. I love this. All right, it's good. So there is the question of, like, you know, how these movies answer, can we be a we? So what you see here on this slide is the ones that are green, those are the ones that say, yes, we can be a we. They're kind of redemptive tales where the we does happen. The ones that are in red, I just are no, they can't be a we. The ones that are in blue are like, sort of maybe, I'm not sure. So like, for instance, women talking, you have the women who actually leave the colony and leave the men, spoiler alert. And so they are a we, the women are, but they're no longer a we as far as the colony is concerned. Or if you look at the Fabelmans, yeah, they're a we, but they're kind of, you know, there's people have left the family and things like that. There's sort of a we. So it brings in this question of, you know, like what I call the center of good. It's another theme that comes into the movies, and that is that it's sort of complicated. Like 8 of the movies, the idea of what is good is kind of complicated, or what is nice is kind of complicated. You know what I mean by center of good, right? You want to tell them what that means as far as screenwriting?
Yeah, the center of good is a screenwriting term. It just means the thing that the audience is rooting for. So in a superhero movie, the center of good is them defeating the bad guy. But in a romance movie, the center of good would usually be, well, we want them to get together.
Right.
But some movies, like a lot of the movies during this Oscar season, have sort of a complex center of good where it's like, I kind of see both sides here, and I don't know what I really want for them.
Right, exactly. So we wanted to show a clip of what that looks like from Banshees of Inisherin, because that movie, if anything, was one of those movies where you went in the first time and you were like, oh, poor Colin Farrell's character, this is what happens to him. And then you come back and watch it the second time and you're like, I don't know, maybe he was, no, I don't think so. And then you kind of are rooting for the other character. And then you watch it the third time and you're like, I can't even, I need to talk to somebody about this. I don't know if you've ever been in a movie where you're like, I got to talk to somebody about this movie. Usually what's happening when that happens is the center of good is not clear. It makes us talk about things, right? It makes us have conversations because that center of good is just not a good or bad, evil or good. It's like, well, I can't find the good in this, right? And so we're going to show you a clip that is Colin Farrell's character is named Porrick. Porrick? Yeah.
Porrick?
Porrick. It's hard to say.
You gotta
in
get the
Irish.
accent in there.
Porrick. And then Brendan Gleeson's character is Colm. And Colm has basically told Park, hey, I don't want to, like, we're breaking up. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And so this is a scene of, you can see the tension between the two characters and the lack of center of good.
Why can't you just leave me alone, Parry? Huh? I've already told you, haven't I?
Yeah, I know, I was just...
I mean, why can't you just leave me alone? What are you doing?
I don't know.
For fuck's sake, like.
How's the new tune?
What?
So you can see in the clip, and if you watch the movie, it'll make a lot more sense. These are two guys who have kind of broken up, and and when you watch it, you feel sorry for Colin Farrell's character. You're like, oh, bless his heart. But then you also are like, Brendan Gleeson's character. You're like, well, he just will not respect the fact that he does not want to be friends anymore. And so you're sitting there really trying to figure out what the center of good is. And I feel like when we look at our nation, and when we look at the concept of can we be a we, now we've got that we're fighting, and then it's like we can't figure out who's right or wrong. We can't figure out who's good and who's bad. We have a lack of sense of center of good. And let me make matters even worse with one more theme, which is the theme of staying or going. And there's a lot of breakups or attempted breakups in these movies. Like, people are leaving right and left. And so I'll show you this one. Here's what that looks like in the movies.
Stay and fight?
Leave.
I'm leaving.
Leaving? Like leaving? Like not staying?
No. You will be sued for breach of contract because I will no longer be the promoter of your career. I will have to leave you.
Come, Abigail. Go. Abigail.
Fableman is the kindest, smartest, wisest, most patient, most decent, most understanding man there is, and I'm gonna stay married to him.
We'll always be together, won't we, Paul? Yeah. We'll stick together. We'll always be. I can't do this, Paul. I can't do this. I need to go home. I need to go home.
I think we need to go our separate ways.
Are you breaking up with me?
Not at prom, but of course, eventually.
Your mom misses Phoenix too much.
Tell them the truth.
And I can't leave. This is where my work is. I have to.
We stay together. You love each other, and you love us.
You'll be back soon, won't you, Siobhan?
Oh, Porrick.
real pork. Say yes.
I have to go.
Will you please stay?
I have to go. Okay, if I stay, I'll never leave. You have to let me go. You have to let me go.
Just let me go.
So we must decide now to stay and fight or leave. Those are the options in front of us. We will not do nothing.
It makes me tear up.
Really?
Yeah.
It is a lot of leaving, right? So, you've got fighting, can't figure out what's good, and then a whole lot of leaving. And I was thinking about this leaving thing, and forgive me for this one, but the other day in the news, we had someone who suggested that we should break up and divorce. Marjorie Taylor Greene said that we should be like divorcing as a country and separating as states. And so I don't think that's the answer, by the way. I'm not promoting that at all. I think that's a little bit crazy, but that was just sort of when I was watching all these characters leaving, I'm like, oh, well, I hope that doesn't happen. I hope this is not what this is foreshadowing. And I don't believe it is. In fact, we're going to kind of go through some of the things of what it could be. But for me, I just felt like, okay, you've got these three things when we're trying to figure out, are we going to be a we? These three themes that seem like it's just like a no. And so I called up a friend of mine. Her name is Shaylyn Romney Garrett. You know her because you've interviewed her too.
She is freaking brilliant.
Yeah, tell them about her.
Yeah, she co-wrote a book called The Upswing.
Oh, I got it right here. Go ahead.
Yeah. She co-wrote that book called The Upswing with Bob Putnam, who also wrote Bowling Alone several decades ago.
Which Bowling Alone is huge. It was like a seminal work that really applies today to the concept of loneliness.
Yeah. So she is now writing a book about the sort of a common positive vision we need for the future. And she's long been someone who really resonated with your idea of will we be a we and what is culture moving towards, a we or a not we.
Yeah, so the whole book really is about the concept of we. So I called her up and I said, Shaylyn, explain the book to folks so they understand this concept of how we have historically been going through an I, we, I curve, which she'll explain. And then we'll also talk to her about what she feels like the state of we is. So this is it's a deep dive into this book. She does a little bit of a summary of it. So here's Shaylyn. I want folks to hear, like with The Upswing, kind of the hope and the promise that you and Robert Putnam put together as far as just this historical, downswing and upswing of the concept of individualism versus kind of the we concept.
Right.
Can you give that just like in a brief, synopsis? I know you took a whole book
Sure.
to explain it, but
Sure. Yeah. So I was talking earlier about how we're living in this really hyper individualistic moment. And the way that the reason that I can say that is because the data is quite clear. When you take measures of culture, when you take measures of our social fabric or how connected or how much we join and associate with one another, when you take measures of our economics, how equal we are versus unequal a distribution of resources. And also when you look at our politics, how willing we are to cooperate across party lines versus being polarized. When you take all of those measures together, it's clear that we are more polarized, more economically unequal, more socially isolated, and more culturally narcissistic than we have been at almost any other time in our history. That's today. And so the question is, of course, how did we get here? And are there any lessons of history for sort of how we descended into this moment? Are there any other times when we weren't in a moment like this? And so my co-author and I, what we did is we looked at trends over time in all of these four areas of our society over the last 125 years. And what we found was that the moment we're living in today is not the first time that we've been here. We've been in another extremely isolated, narcissistic, unequal, polarized moment. And that was at the turn of the last century in the early 1900s, a time that historians called the Gilded Age. So the last Gilded Age, which happened on the heels of the Industrial Revolution, was a time that looked remarkably similar to the one that we're living in. But what happened in between? That time, just like today, was a time when commentators were saying, it's tyranny and it's plutocracy and it's the end of democracy and the American experiment has failed. And yet, none of those doomsday prophecies were fulfilled. On the contrary, the data shows that we entered this multifaceted, multi-decade upswing during which we became more economically equal, less and less polarized, decade upon decade, more and more connected socially and associating with one another, forming families, forming communities, and also less and less narcissistic, more and more focused on what we could do together, more solidaristic in our culture. And so that trend continued almost uninterrupted in all of those areas of our society for almost 70 years, between about 1900 and the mid 1960s.
Yeah.
But then in the mid 1960s, when we reached this peak of we feeling or a we phenomenon in our society, instead of continuing to go upward, which is what John F. Kennedy hoped we would do when he said, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. He was articulating that we ethos.
Yeah.
But what happened instead was we turned in the other direction. And all of those different measures in economics, politics, society, and culture, we took a sharp turn in the direction of I, and we slid downward for over a half century, going right back where we started. So we call this the I century that was really individualistic at the beginning. We moved ourselves into more we direction, and now we've slid back down into more I direction. So the question is, can we create another upswing? Can we get ourselves back in a mode of we, and how would we do that? And so that's what that book is about.
Pretty brilliant stuff, huh? Yeah. So I asked her, I said, okay, here are the themes this year. Like, tell me what you think as far as, the state of we, where we are right now, especially post-COVID. So here's what that sounded like. Where do you feel like we are as far as this concept of we right now after COVID? Like, I feel like we went through an event that was a pretty major event where we did kind of we things. And it felt like I thought, well, this is going to be the tipping point to we, because we all kind of did, some hard things together.
Yeah.
But it doesn't kind of feel that way. Is that kind of your vibe on it all? Like, what do you feel like is the kind of the state of the union of the concept of can we be a we?
I'm really reminded. I was thinking about this yesterday because someone was saying to me, after, during the pandemic, we had the rise of all this kind of mutual aid and people working together and sort of taking care of one another. And as I was listening to this, I thought, right, but where is that now? Has that sustained? And I was reminded of what happened after 9/11. After 9/11, we had this real surge of togetherness, a sense of being in this together. This crisis had sort of turned our hearts toward one another. And all of the studies of that period show that lasted exactly about 6 weeks. And then we started
Really?
back to normal.
Wow. Oh my
And so
gosh.
for a crisis of that magnitude, that was how long the effect was of the crisis itself changing us, right? And so I think there's a real sense that I encounter this a lot when I talk to groups about historical narratives and change over time in whether we're a we or whether we're more isolated and individualistic. And people have this sense that it's outside events that turn us toward one another, that it's something outside of us, some crisis that's going to bring us together, right? And there was this sense that COVID was going to do that.
Yeah.
And what it shows is that there really is a temporary effect of an outside shock bringing us together. But if we don't continue to choose that togetherness over time, what we do is just go back to what we're habituated to, which is all of the isolation and the loneliness and the individualism. And so I think there was a real chance to learn and to really start to change, but I think there was also this scary recognition that the way in which we needed to change was going to require us to do some deep inner work that it seems like most of us aren't ready to do. And so we're defaulting back to where we were before, I think.
So that's her perspective. So, that's you know, the concept of we and this question of can we be a we.